As Sarah said, we are continuing our sermon series this morning that I'm entitling The Gospel According to Pixar, and we are looking at a number of our favorite Pixar hymns. One of the things that we mentioned last week is that what endears these films to us, whether we are 4 or 104, oftentimes is not necessarily the eye-grabbing animation, but more importantly, it is the characters. The characters that have this reality to them, even if it's a talking toy or a rat or a mouse, there is still this reality to them that endears themselves to us. And we oftentimes finding ourselves empathizing or sympathizing with their struggles and sort of understanding what it is. And in many ways, these characters help us understand and build our own characters. And they do so, I think, which is interesting, they do so in a way that doesn't preach at us. Pixar is not overtly religious. In many ways, I would argue that the line between the sacred and the secular is oftentimes blurred. But they do so in a way that doesn't, it's not in your face. It's not overt. They don't preach at us, unlike some people I know. But just what they do is they tell good stories. They tell great stories. Robert Coles is a world-renowned child psychiatrist. He teaches at Harvard University and has written a number of books, something like 80 books that he's written, including some of his most well-known, The Spiritual Life of Children or The Moral Life of Children. He was once asked, how do you raise a moral child? Came back with a very simple answer. He simply said, you tell them stories. You tell them stories. In many ways, that is what Pixar does so well. And they have a way of engaging us, heart and mind and soul. Last night here in the sanctuary, we had a movie night, and we had folks that were gathered here to watch the movie that we're going to talk about in just a minute. And there were a number of 2- and 3-year-old kids running around, one of them wearing her Disney costume, very, very adorable. We had other people in their 80s, and all of them deeply, deeply engaged with the character and with the stories. These stories are rooted oftentimes in relationships, and they do so in a way that carries with it some honesty and some sensitivity and grace. And we will see that in the movie that we're going to be talking about this morning. This morning we're talking about the movie Brave, which is, until Friday, was the most recent Pixar movie that came out. It came out just last summer. And it is a divergence from the previous 15 Pixar movies. One of the things that is different about it is that it is a fairy tale. But more importantly, the main difference about Brave from the rest of the Pixar films, one of the criticisms of Pixar over the last 20 years, or however long they've been in business, is that they lacked what most Disney films had in abundance. Any ideas what that is? Female leads, exactly right. This is the first Pixar movie in which the story revolves around a female heroine. And so we're going to be talking about that in just a minute. The text that we're going to be reading in just a minute, that Meg's going to read for us, is from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Now Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, the second letter that he writes, is writing to the church in Corinth. Now Corinth was a port city about 40 miles outside of Athens, Greece. And as a port city, it had made it somewhat unique in that it tended to be fairly affluent because it was a port city. You had people coming and going. And not only that, because it was a port city, also you had a wide variety of different types of people that were there in that city. Now, he's writing to a church in Corinth that is going through a difficult time, and there are factions within the church. The church has sort of split, not necessarily in two, but in many different factions. What was happening, we can understand in this letter, is that people were having these profound religious experiences, these passionate encounters with God. But rather than those encounters with God producing a sense of humility and grace, it was producing within these people a sense of pride and arrogance. And they were essentially saying to one another, unless you experience God the way that I experience God, unless you believe what it means to be a Christian the way I believe, well, then you aren't really a Christian. And it was dividing these religious experiences, these understandings, these encounters with God were dividing people rather than uniting them. And Paul writes to them and says, wait a minute. As people of faith, we are to be about reconciliation, about bringing people together. We are to be reconciled with one another just as God has reconciled himself with us through Christ.
From now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view. Even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view, we know him no longer in that way. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. All this is from God, who has reconciled us to God through Christ, and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to God, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. So we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making God's appeal through us, we entreat you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God.
In accordance with our laws, only the firstborn may compete for the hand of the fair maiden. Archers, to your mark!
Aye, archers, to your mark!
And may the lucky arrow find its target.
Get on with it!
I bet he wishes he was tossing cabers.
I'm holding up bridges. And such lovely flowing locks.
Fergus.
What?
Oh, wee lamb.
Oh, come on. Shoot, boy!
Feast your eyes.
Well, that's just grand now, isn't it?
Merida, and I'll be shooting for my own hand.
What are you doing?
Merida!
Curse this dress!
Merida, stop this! Don't you dare loose another arrow! Merida, I forbid it.
Things are going to get good. So you've got Princess Merida, who has this spirit that is as fiery as her red hair. Right? She's the type of person who is a bit of a free spirit. She would much rather prefer the bows that shoot arrows than the ones that go in her hair. She is a bit of a rebellious spirit who wants to be able to call her own shots, to be able to live her own life. But then you've got the mother, Eleanor, the queen, who is the one who is all about tradition, who's reminding her that she has been preparing her entire life to be the queen and all that entails. I said earlier that this is the first Pixar movie that has a female in the lead, and actually there are two very strong women that lead this story. And as often happens when you've got two strong women, you often have a very complex relationship. And in many ways, that's what we've got here. An incredibly complex relationship. There are all sorts of different themes and images and ideas that sort of drive this story. And to be honest with you, I had a hard time sort of narrowing it down on what exactly that I was going to use as the driving force in this sermon. At one point, I thought that I was going to talk about how important it is for young girls to stand up and to find their own voice. And to be able to stand up and speak for themselves and to proclaim who they are in an oftentimes male-dominant society. In many ways, this is a coming-of-age type of movie for Merida. She does come to this point where she finds her own voice, and she begins to speak out for who she is and for what she wants in life, not what is necessarily automatically being given to her. I want to introduce you to a beautiful woman. Her name is Malala Yousafzai. Anybody ever know who Malala is? Malala is 15 years old, and she lives in Pakistan, just near the border of Afghanistan, in a part of the world that is ruled by the Taliban. Now, if you know anything about the Taliban, you know that they don't believe that women should be educated. In fact, they should remain completely silent and not have any responsibility or role in life other than simply producing children and offspring. But Malala, as a young girl, has a dream within her to become a doctor. And so she began speaking out and demanding that she go to school. In fact, she even says, "I don't even need a desk, just allow me a place to sit on the floor where I can learn and have a future." She began at the age of 11 working with the BBC to keep an online diary that would speak out against the atrocities of the Taliban. Began to speak out in favor of women, of girls having a voice, a role in society other than that which has been given to her. As you can imagine, that did not go over so well. In some ways, she began receiving awards for her courage and for her ability to speak out and to claim her own voice. She received an International Children's Peace Award a couple of years ago. But she also began receiving a number of death threats. Last October 2012, she was on a bus coming home from school with a number of other female students, and armed gunmen from the Taliban stopped the bus and boarded the bus. And they began to speak and said, "Which one of you is Malala? And if you don't stand up and show us who you are, we will kill all of you." And so Malala, speaking on behalf of her sisters that she has wanted to speak up for all of her life, stood up and said, I am Malala. And the gunman shot her in the head and also shot a number of other girls there in the bus, some of them mortally wounded. But Malala did not die. She survived. Malala survived literally by inches. And she has now become, in her recovery, a symbol of hope and privilege. Schools all over Pakistan have been renaming themselves after Malala. They are now Malala Elementary School and such. This is the first picture that has been come out since her attack. And I love that the first public picture of her in her recovery is of her reading a book, a very symbol of what she stands and speaks for, the opportunity to learn and educate, to be educated and to have a future. She is now one of the finalists for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. One could say that in many ways, Malala is the very definition of brave. Now, in preparing for this sermon this morning, I read all sorts of different reviews of the movie Brave. All sorts of different articles and all sorts of different, everything from what the NPR had to say to focus on the family, which, as you can imagine, were very different thoughts and opinions on the movie. One of the things that some folks said is that what's wrong with this film is that it glorifies rebellion. That in many ways it encourages people to be disrespectful and disobedient. I would argue that there are times in our lives when we are called by God to stand up and to speak out, to find our own voice and to be rebellious. Especially when we speak for those who have no voice. Sometimes it is important for us to speak and to rebel and to find our own voice. Another one of the themes that we could have talked about this morning is the complex relationship that happens between parents and teenagers. In general, more specifically between daughters and mothers. Now, I know none of you have ever had complex relationships with your daughters. I know that sort of thing never happens in this church. But in other churches, I've heard that there are people that have complex relationships. One of the things that I saw in preparing for the sermon, somebody said this. They said, to be a Disney princess is to have mommy issues. And I think in some ways that's true. When you think about Snow White and Cinderella and Rapunzel and now Merida, all of these princesses have mommy issues. In this movie, Brave, Merida and her mother, the Queen Eleanor, they really struggle with how to connect. They really struggle to connect. You've got this rebellious, rambunctious girl that would love to ride and play and shoot arrows. And then you've also got this mother who believes quite strongly that our only perfection is good enough. And so she spends all of her days teaching Merida how to act and how to eat and how to talk and how to walk. And she says at one point, only perfection is good enough. And so what you see there is this struggle between this mom who has this strong need to prepare her daughter to be who she is being raised to be, up against this daughter who has this strong desire for freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, not unlike most adolescent teenage girls. Teen years are hard. Teen years are hard, and what this movie does is sort of acknowledge that. It points out, it doesn't shy away and say, oh, everything's happily ever after. In the end, it says, no. Relationships are hard and complex and difficult. But it also says that if we can just strip away all of the differences, if we can strip away all of the hurt, all of the angry words that get spoken, if we can just strip it all away, there is a bond between a mother and a daughter that can be transcendent. And we celebrate that as well. So there's that theme, there's that issue, but I would argue that the strongest, most important, most accessible theme, I guess you could say, in this movie is that of reconciliation. Really what this movie points us to is that the real prize in life is reconciliation, of mending broken relationships. Just after the scene that you saw just a minute ago in the trailer, Merida rides off. Actually, no, that's not true. Actually, right after the scene that you just saw, Merida, having claimed her own voice and fought for her own hand and won, right? She continues to have a conflict with her mom. They go into the castle, and then this is when the fireworks really happen.
Mighty, I've just about had enough of you, lass. You're the one who wants me to...
You embarrassed them. You embarrassed me.
I follow the rules.
You don't know what you've done.
I just don't care
You'll be
how
fire and sword if it's not set right.
Just listen.
I am the queen. You listen to me.
Ah! This is so unfair.
Unfair?
You're never there for me. This whole marriage is what you want. Do you ever bother to ask what I want? No. You walk around telling me what to do, what not to do, trying to make me be like you. Well, I'm not going to be like you.
Oh, you're acting like a child.
And you're a beast. That's what you are.
Merida.
I'll never be like you.
Stop that.
I'd rather die than be like you.
Merida, you're a princess, so I expect you
Mom!
to act like one. Merida! Merida! Oh dear. Oh no. What have I done?
I'd rather die than be like you. Words that cut deep into the heart of a mother. Words that almost immediately after they came out of her mouth, the daughter wished she'd never said. Immediately after the scene, Merida rides off on her horse into the wilderness, where she would come across a witch. And the witch, after some begging, conniving, and some deal-making, casts a spell. I just want my mother changed, she says. Casts the spell, which inevitably turns her into a bear. Big, gruesome, monstrous bear. The rest of the movie is them, the two of them, this bear of a mother and this rebellious teenage princess, seeking reconciliation, trying to figure out how they can journey to mend the bond which pride has broken. Is the great line from the movie. Trying to mend the bond which pride has broken. We've talked a lot in this church about forgiveness. In fact, a number of months ago, I did an entire sermon series on forgiveness. And we talked about the difficulty, yet the importance of being able to forgive one another, but also being able to seek forgiveness. I would argue that forgiveness is the first step. Reconciliation is the next step. And in many ways, the harder, more difficult step, but yet also what we are called, as you heard in the text a moment ago, what we are called to do and to be about in the life of the church. Perhaps you could say it this way. Forgiveness takes one person. Reconciliation takes two. And in many ways, that's what we're talking about here. There is this bravery that takes place, that lives in our ability to seek transformation, to seek reconciliation, to seek forgiveness, to try and mend those broken relationships and those bonds that have been torn apart. In over 20 years of ministry, one of the hardest parts for me is to be a part of some of your lives and to see the way in which relationships that you've been a part of, that have meant the world to you, have become fractured and broken. Partners and spouses, family members, friends, co-workers, just about every single one of us have experienced one of those relationships where all of a sudden it breaks apart. Words are spoken that can't be taken back. Feelings are hurt. And the relationship begins to resolve and to end and to break apart. And every single one of those are painful at a very deep and profound level. We know that to be true. We know what that's like when those relationships fall apart. Merida begins to think almost immediately how she can reconcile. And her first thought is that all she needs to do is to mend that tapestry, right? The one that she tore through with the sword. If she can just mend that tapestry, mend that tear that was broken in pride, if she can just fix that, everything will be right. But what she comes to discover is that it's deeper than that. It's more profound than that. And she comes to realize eventually, after having placed all of the blame on the witch, and on the bear, and on everybody else, it's not my fault. I haven't done anything wrong. It's their fault, right? She comes to realize that, wait a minute, Mom, I've done this to you. I've done this to you. And she comes to look at her own actions. She comes to look at her own behaviors and gets to the point where she says this great line. She says this great line. Next slide. Not that one. Our fate lies within us. We just have to be brave enough to see it. Our fate lies within us. We just have to be brave enough to see it. In other words, we have to own up to our own mistakes. We have to acknowledge the ways in which we have wronged other people. We have to acknowledge that we may not always be right. In fact, sometimes we're wrong. Not you, of course, but other people are wrong from time to time. This quote that I wanted to see was written by John Paul Letterback, who is a sort of an expert on reconciliation and conflict resolution, and a professor at a Christian college. He says this. He says, "We will find God present in the journey towards reconciliation, in the depths of fear, in the hopelessness of dark nights, in the tears of reconnection. The pathway through conflict towards reconciliation is filled with God encounters." Filled with God encounters. When we seek to do the difficult work of reconciliation, to try and mend those broken relationships, we discover that God is present in a very real and tangible way. In many ways, that's what Paul says to the church in Corinth. That we are to be about this ministry of reconciliation, of bringing people together, of recognizing that we are all in this together. And that we are all to be about coming together as one. So this morning, is there someone in your life? Is there someone in your life that bond has been broken? And you need to find a way to reconcile with that person. Is there someone with whom and for whom words have been spoken? Feelings have been hurt? Is there someone with you and for you that the bond has been broken by pride? If so, my prayer for you is that you will begin that long and difficult journey towards reconciliation. That you will not recognize and realize that it will take some work. And some of that work may be painful and it may be difficult. And it may take admitting some of your own shortcomings and failures. But it is worth it. It is worth it. That what wins in the day is not necessarily doing all things right, but admitting when we've done things wrong. What happens in the end is that we discover that the real prize in life is being in relationship with our brothers and sisters, with our family, with our friends, and that together, our fate lies within us. If only we are brave enough to see it. Will you pray with me, please? Eternal loving God, we ask for courage for the journey towards reconciliation. We ask, God, that you give us courage to be brave, to stand up, to be bold, to admit when we've been wrong, to acknowledge our shortcomings, and to acknowledge, God, that We are all in this together. We pray all of this in the name of your Son, who lived, who died, and who lives again, that we might know what it means to live. Amen.